Want to know how I took this Hot Toys Pennywise from this to this? Well, stay tuned and you'll float too. Welcome to Crafted by Metamorphic Customs. I'm Desi, and in today's episode, we'll be doing a little bit of figure customization. Nope, not a diorama this time, because this figure by Hot Toys actually comes with a pretty neat diorama. So what I'm going to do now is customize this figure. Not that this figure needs any customization. What I'm doing here is weathering the Pennywise suit, the clown outfit, number one. Number two, I'm going to pop up or puff up the collar so that it sits more flush with his the bottom of his neck or the bottom of his jaw, top of his neck, bottom of his jaw, as it does in the movie. And the last thing is I'm going to be bringing out the texture detail on his forehead because in the original prototype you can really see that texture, but it got lost a little bit in the production figure. It's still there. We just need to bring it out a little bit. That's what I'll be doing. So I'll start off by saying there are a couple of videos I've seen already of this Pennywise figure, specifically weathering him up, which is exactly what I'll be doing. The only thing that I'll be doing that's a little different is I'm going to be doing it with weathering pigments, which are dry powders. I'm not going to be doing it with paint. I've seen a couple of videos that do it with paint, and those are awesome videos. The end result was great on those videos, I think. But I want to do it with pigments because I'd like to use pigments to control the effect a little bit more. Now, there's pros and cons to pigments, especially if you're not using a sealer, which I am not using a sealer with these pigments. So they're not necessarily fixed, but I prefer the look of pigments just on this application. And again, they're dry powders. They're going to go on dry, and they're going to slowly stain the suit, the clown suit on this figure to make it look that much more weathered. However, I'm not going to exaggerate. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm choosing to use pigments, because for me, I can have a better degree of control. When I water down paints, and I speak only for myself, but when I water down paints and apply that to fabrics, depending on the type of fabric, it tends to have a different effect once it dries. You know, you could be doing a really watered down black or blackish brown, and it is really watered down, and then when it finally dries, you kind of see the stain. You see like what I like to call a coffee stain or a tea stain on the clothes, and it looks like water effect, right? That's not what I'm going for. I'm just going for a dirty look, like he rolled around in the dirt a little bit. So he's got dirt on it, right? So that's why I'm choosing to use pigments, because they're powders. So let's go to the workshop.
And let's start by removing the hands, make this easier, as well as the head. I'm going to leave these shoes on. I don't see why I need to remove those, but first thing we'll do is carefully cut these single threads that are keeping the collar tied to the vest. I'm using a sharp X-Acto blade to do that. If this seems nerve-wracking to you, it is. So just be very careful. It's just single threads here that are really stitched into the top of the torso shirt or vest, whatever you want to call it, and it goes all around. It's got about 4, maybe 5, and once you get those, it'll easily come off. Really no reason why it needs to be tied down. It's not going to fall off even if you hold the figure upside down once the head's on. So and removing this will make it a lot easier to mod the collar so that it sits higher much later on. There's some threads left behind, so I'm going to clip those off with the clipper. Make it nice and neat there. And now it's time for the Vallejo Pigments. I'm going to use a color called Green Earth and a second color called Light Sienna. I'm going to mix these two together, and then later on I'll introduce some black here. But I'm starting with these two because the Green Earth is obviously green and the Light Sienna is a light ochre or light brown, and mixing these two together gives me like a grayish green but has some brown in the color, and then the black just darkens it up a bit, as you can see I've introduced the black pigment here. And I mix that all together, and I have this, again, this light gray, but with a hint of green in it. It's exactly what I'm going for. And with a clean, dry brush, I'm just going to grab that pigment just a little bit at a time and apply it by brushing it on to the areas that I want to be weathered or just darker, dirtier. I'm trying to hit areas like the back of the knee, right up in the torso above the belt. And again, I have looked at some pictures of the character Pennywise from the film, and he appears dirtier in some scenes and obviously cleaner in others, somewhere in between. You know, I'm going for not too dirty, but not too clean. Clean is how he came, you know, straight out of the factory from Hot Toys. So I'm just going to keep applying some of this pigment in these areas to get him to the point where I want him to be. And that kind of changes. If you're doing this, you might have a different idea than I do. You might want to get him really dirty, or you might not even want to get him as dirty as I'm getting him here, or weather him as much as I'm weathering the clothes here. So it's really all up to you. And as you can see, I'm not using any kind of pigment fixer or adhesive. And in other words, I'm not using a liquid medium to apply the pigments. Using a fixer, a liquid fixer or medium will sometimes help the pigment adhere better to the substrate, in this case the clothing, but I also wanted to avoid using a fixer, a liquid medium, to prevent any hard water stains or like that hard coffee stain, you know, with a rim around it. You know, I didn't want anything like that. I just wanted it to be a gradual weathering. So that's why I decided to go against the use of a fixer and just apply the pigment directly onto the clothing with a brush. And it allowed me even further control because I could just apply little bits at a time until it eventually gets to the color I want it to get to. And if you look at different images from the film, the bottom of this skirt area, if you will, usually was one of the areas that was consistently weathered. It was darker than the top portion there, so that kind of makes sense. So that's what I was trying to go for here. Also want to give a few passes right towards the bottom of the stomach area, right above the belt. That area was also generally weathered no matter what picture from the film I looked at. Heavy weathering, light weathering, that area was always one of the ones that seemed to have grime or dirt on it. As I continue to apply these weathering pigments, I'm constantly stopping and looking at images of Pennywise from the film. I keep repeating that because I think it's important. I wanted to match it as best I can. I'm not going for anything super screen accurate or anything like that, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't go too far here. Again, I only wanted to get it slightly more weathered than what came from Hot Toys, which I felt was a little too clean for my taste. Here I'm hitting the ruffles at the end of the sleeves, but there's multiple layers here, right? There's the outer and then the inner ruffles. I'm trying to hit both, but trying to focus towards the edges. And also these big shoulder pads, I'm not sure what these things are called, but these big puffs here at the shoulders, I'm trying to hit the bottom area of them. And I'm trying to move them around to make sure I get that bottom area as well as I can, as consistently as I can. And as I do this, I am actually not avoiding those red and white bands at the wrist and upper arms there that you see. I'm purposefully trying to get the pigments on there. I want to dirty those up as well. Also makes sense to weather up the back of the elbows. Because I'm choosing not to go too heavy-handed with the weathering, it's important for me to keep a picture of the original Hot Toy Pennywise handy and nearby so that I can see what the original looked like, because this already has come a long way, even though it may not look it because we've been slowly adding the pigment, but this is much better already. Got some final passes here in the torso, darken that up. Same thing for the belt area. And we're just going back and deciding where I want the most weathered areas to be and giving those, well, another pass with the pigments. And I think I'll call that done. This is pretty much how I envisioned it, so not too bad. Let's go ahead and move on to some of the weathering on the forehead. I'm using FW ink black, and I'm mixing this with water. Just a couple of drops of ink, maybe 2, perhaps 3 drops, and the rest of it just water on this small palette I have here. And next to that, I'm just using regular H2O. And I'm coming with a clean brush here, and I'm going to water that down even further, that ink and water mixture. And I'm just going to apply it to the forehead here. And the reason I'm doing this is because it has some of this crusted, flaky stuff on his forehead, just like the character had in the movie. And in the prototype Hot Toys made, it was very apparent. You know, it was great. When they casted the head or injection molded the head for production, that detail got a little softer, which is normal when you go to production. But it's still there. The detail is there. We just got to bring it out by putting a wash over it with this black ink, as I'm doing here. Because the ink will seep into the recesses in between the little cracks and the flakes in the forehead. And I'm just going to dry some of the ink off. I don't want it to pool. Just a very light application. Once the ink is dry, I'm going to move on to some Hobbycraft white paint. This is a Americana paint, but any Hobbycraft white paint will do. I'm going to use a dry brushing technique. Grab a little bit of white on a clean brush and dry most of that paint off on a paper towel. And then I'm going to lightly pass over the forehead area after the inks are dry. And this white paint, by dry brushing, it'll pick up the edges of those flake textures on his forehead, further emphasizing the texture. So the sculpted detail will be much easier to see in person. And I'm using the exact same process on both heads, or I should say on the foreheads of both heads. And when I'm done, I'll pop one of these heads back on the body here. But first, of course, I put the collar back on. That looks good. Not bad. And there's one more important modification left. I'm going to use a cotton ball here and just rip off little bits at a time. And I'm going to use this to prop up the collar. Now that we've been able to cut it loose from the clothing, from the vest or the shirt, whatever you want to call it, you can pop this cotton under it, and it'll just make the collar sit a little higher. And I'm going to focus on the back and towards the sides of the neck, maybe the side towards the front a little bit. And that'll really make it pop towards the back and on each side, and that'll eliminate that huge gap he had between the collar and the bottom of the head, and which showed too much neck. And this is pretty simple, right? Yes, you did have to cut the collar free from the shirt, but once you do that, it's really a game changer. Let's take a look at this figure all posed up And you can see here in the proper lighting, it really does make a difference when you add some weathering here. It looks a little bit closer to what I remember seeing in the film. I mean, and don't get me wrong, this was a great figure from the get-go without any modifications, but this just took it to the next level for me. The more visible texture on the forehead and the collar being propped up more so it's closer to his mouth, to his jawline, that really makes it look nice. You can really get some nice poses with this guy, and I haven't removed the fat suit. I happen to like the fat suit. I know without it you can get a lot of extreme poses, but even with it here, you can get some iconic poses from the film and just some great looks. I mean, look at that stare. Very creepy. You gotta love it. And I had to do a pose with the crazy mouth and teeth head and the werewolf hands. Really is a great figure. I'm happy I picked this guy up and decided to do the modifications you saw in this episode. Hot Toys decided to include one of their best dioramas with this figure, but I might do a diorama for this guy in the future sometime.
Hopefully you liked watching that, or you cringed as soon as I presented the X-Acto blade to the figure. The point is, I thought the end result was great. I think he looks great right over here. Not that the original figure looks bad. In fact, I just said I think it's one of the best figures they've released in a while, production-wise. So I think it looked great, but I wanted to take it to that next level, and I think I was able to do that. I humbly say I was able to do that. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Last thing I'll say, as always, like the video if you like watching it. Comment down below. Tell me how I'm crazy for doing this and how I devalued the toy or valued it, whatever you prefer. Tell me if you're going to give it a shot. Ask any questions you want. Give me some alternate suggestions on how to approach this or go about it another way. That's fine too. And of course, as I always say, subscribe, hit the bell notification if you want to be notified of new video uploads as they come up. And as always, stay crafted and stay away from clowns in the sewer drains. This should be self-explanatory, even if you're 5 years old. Had to be said.